Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from the Tiny Menagerie. When it comes to fish food, there are three things which are very important to hobbyists. That's the nutritional value, the ease of feeding, and of course the cost associated with the food. And depending on where you live, possibly availability too, but that's very situational. And as a newbie to the hobby though, there can be a bewildering array of different types and styles of fish food available. So how do you know what you should be feeding to your pets? Well, just like most animals, fish need to have a diet that consists of a mixture of proteins, fats, vitamins and minerals, and to a much lesser extent carbohydrates. And how much of these and how the fish get them is going to vary hugely between species, depending on how they feed, be they predators, herbivores, omnivores or algae scrapers. And so, for simplicity's sake, the information in this video is going to be generalised based on your standard common omnivorous community species. And also, because fish food is a big old topic, we're going to cut it down into chunks, otherwise this video might get sillily long. And so, this first episode is going to focus on the nutritional value of fish food, looking at the constituents of some commonly available foods in the UK, primarily tetramin flakes, aquarian flakes, Hikari micropellets, NT Labs probiotic tropical, and fluval bug bites, as well as frozen and live foods, using these ones for no other reason other than because they're really common and so other people will be able to compare them for themselves too. So first up, let's take a look at protein. And protein is effectively what flesh is made from. It's the building blocks of life, as they say, made up from tiny constituent parts called amino acids, some of which fish are able to synthesize for themselves, but some they can't, and so they need to be consumed from an outside source. Protein in the diet then is vital for fish to be able to grow, heal, have healthy immune and hormonal systems, exactly the same as it is for us. But how much protein fish need in their diet varies throughout their lives. As a basic rule then, if you're growing fry, you're going to want food with at least 50% protein. Once they're beyond the fry stage but still growing, then fish require over 35% protein, and once they've reached adulthood, they've become maximum size, they only need about 25% protein just for maintaining their weight. And so you can see that the percentage of protein needed in fish food decreases as they get older. And because protein is one of the more expensive components of fish food, you'll often see that food that is intended specifically for fry is much pricier than that for adult fish based on a weight-by-weight comparison. And an interesting note is that all of the foods that I looked at had protein components listed in the 40s, so they're all aiming for the growing fish percentage of protein. No doubt because when you buy young fish and you get your first food for them, if they didn't grow nicely without stunting or deformations, that is going to seriously hurt your opinion of the brand going forward. But because protein is expensive, let's not overdo it. It's also quite difficult to know when a fish has stopped growing. Keepers aren't going to want to accidentally stunt their own fish, and also many keepers will have younger and older fish all living together in the same tank. And so, manufacturers are aiming for the safest level to get the best results in the community setting, without having to have huge amounts of protein in the food cutting into their profits for no reason. In fact, the only food I came across that contained less than 40% protein was aquarian flakes at 35%, so still just enough protein for the growing percentage of fish, and plenty for an adult fish, just a bit lower than the others. Next then we have fats or lipids, which fish need in their diets in order to provide them with energy, as well as maintain cell function and general development, and it's also vital to help with the absorption of other key minerals. In general, fish have very different needs when it comes to digesting fats compared to us, and so giving them a slab of beef dripping probably isn't going to help. Typically fats that are provided for them in commercial feed come from fish as well, so it tends to be either omega-3 or omega-6, which has been derived from fish meal. And the amount of fat in fish food varies. But interestingly, a study that I found from the North American Journal for Aquaculture found that fish fed high levels of fats grew really quickly, but when fed this for prolonged periods of time, they suffered from fatty deposits in their liver, and this is known to be a leading cause of death of most fish in aquaria. Some fat in the diet is a good thing, but living on bacon will probably put you in hospital, much the same for fish. This being the case then, the suggested levels of fats in fish food is between 5 and 10%, enough to provide them with the energy that they need within that very constricted environment of captivity, but not so much that it's going to cause them damage. And sadly again, fats are quite cheap for fish food manufacturers, and so many fish foods go above that recommended level. Tetramin flakes had 11%, fluval bug bites had 12%, Hikari only had 7%, and NT Labs probiotic only had 8.5%, which is good to see, but don't get excited, we will be coming back to both of these shortly. Before that though, let's take a look at one of the stranger substances you'll often see listed in fish food, and that is ash. And ash is an interesting topic. At first glance, it would be easy to recoil in horror that your fish food contains what is left over after a fire. And, in some respects, that's exactly what it is. Ash in animal feed is created by burning away the proteins, fats and other organic constituents of very, very poor fish meal. It's the sort of stuff you couldn't even feed to dogs, scales and bones and stuff. And what's left over after this intense burning process is used in fish food, and it's usually simply referred to simply as ash or sometimes inorganic matter. And here there are two lines of thought. The fish food manufacturers say it is not a cheap filler, and ash contains high levels of magnesium, calcium and phosphorus, as well as other minerals which fish do need. And this is true, sounds great. However, while there is sadly very little halfway reliable research available on feeding aquarium fish, no one cares enough to pay unless they have links to the manufacturer unfortunately, there is plenty of research that has been done on feeding big farmed fish, salmon and the like. And researchers in these fields have concluded that a low ash content in fish food, about 10%, doesn't hinder fish growth, and it results in a higher amount of the vitamins and minerals being present in the fish. Whereas feeding a higher ash content feed, with about 17%, might not stop the fish from growing, but it also doesn't help them absorb more of these trace elements neither, and ultimately it's just passed straight through the fish back into the water. And so, while ash is not a bad thing for fish, it certainly does contain those minerals that they need. It is only needed in teensy-weensy little quantities, and it's questionable whether they could get those minerals in a more digestible format anyway. Partly because this poor digestibility of the minerals in this format is why it's able to pass straight through the fish in high concentrations, just go straight out and then pollute your water. So why then? Why do some manufacturers use so much of it? Bug Bites only contains 9% of ash, but Hikari Micro Pellets contains a maximum of 17%. And the answer is because some manufacturers do like to use it as cheap filler. It's just cheap filler with some nutritional content. And this is something you will typically see with all fish food. There is a trade-off. Hikari might have a high ash content, but it's got the lowest fat content. NT Labs probiotic has low fat and low ash content, but the second ingredient listed is wheat, which is very poorly digested by many fish and can lead to huge spikes in gut flora. That's bacteria that's living in the intestinal tract, and this commonly results in a condition called bloat, sometimes also called dropsy, which is where effectively the fish has become overcome by pathogenic bacteria feasting and proliferating on the fermenting cereal byproducts in their gut. And bloat is typically fatal, which is why in the probiotic food, NT Labs have counteracted the cheap fillers that they're using with a gut flora stabilizer. That's the probiotic element. So the food is more digestible, because they've stuffed it full of indigestible filler content. And it isn't just wheat. Carbohydrates in general in the form of grains are typically not well utilised by fish digestion. They've never evolved to use it. It's not something that's going to occur in their habitats. It's not like wheat springs up in the middle of a lake. And so, carbohydrate usage in fish food is often seen, but usually it's in very small quantities as a binding agent, so it's being used to hold the food together in a usable pellet or a flake format, rather than the powder it would otherwise be. Now, one thing that is actually remarkably reliable in fish food is the addition of essential vitamins and minerals. And this is because most manufacturers want to be able to claim that they are providing everything that your fish needs. This is a complete feed. You don't need any of the others, just keep buying our lovely brand. And that's important, because in order to do so, to legally call their food complete, it must contain all of the vitamins and minerals that the fish need in the correct dosage. So this is something they don't have a choice about. They have to add those vitamins and minerals. And now I am aware that this video is starting to sound like me beating up on dried food companies. I'm not. They are a business at the end of the day, profits matter, that's what keeps their business running. And despite the fact that I know food isn't perfect, I also pretty much solely feed my fish dried fish food. And this is why. Let's take a look at the nutritional content of frozen food. So, taking a look at Ocean Nutrition's analysis, we can see that a block of frozen bloodworms typically contains around 3% protein, less than 1% fat, teensy little bits of other stuff, and over 95% water. It's the fish equivalent of lettuce. Frozen Daphnia are a little better, with 5% protein and more than 1% fat. Go Daphnia! And you can see why. Considering that Daphnia are much smaller than bloodworms, you can squidge more of them into the cube, and less space is then taken up by frozen moisture, aka ice. And for live food, this will change slightly, simply because the nutritional values of these products is worked out by weight, and that's going to include the water that's been used to form the cube itself. But even if those values do go up, if there's more protein, more fat in there because there's going to be less water using to form the product, it's only going to be going up by a few percent, because living things in general contain an awful lot of water. And it's this water that's lost in the process of making dried food. Dried food is just a much more concentrated product. And this is why, ultimately, frozen feeds are a treat. Fish tend to really like them, and they can have a key role to play when you're breeding fish, but that's going to be another video. Ultimately though, frozen foods just don't have enough nutritional value to give the fish all of they need to be as healthy as possible without having to give it to them in huge quantities. And this makes sense. You look at wild fish, they are eating all of the time. Carp are endlessly glubbering around in the base of a pond, eating worms and detritus and insects and fish eggs. Goldfish will snatch at anything that lands on the surface of the water as soon as it's there, and they will happily compete with each other over it. Fish are adapted at the end of the day to eat lots and lots of low-grade food all day long. Whereas we humans don't want them to be feeding all day long. We want to feed them once, and that once will provide them with everything that they need so that they fit into our lifestyle. And what this boils down to, what it really boils down to in terms of nutrition, is there is no perfect fish food. All fish foods have good points and bad points, and I won't argue that any food is better than any other. There always has to be a compromise somewhere. And so, the best way to ensure that your fish are getting enough nutrition in their food is to give them as varied a diet as you can. Change up the dried food you're giving them every once in a while. Have more than one food in stock and give them something different every day if possible, just as a way to maximise your chances of making sure that your fish are getting enough of the good things, but not too much of the bad things. Plus, it means your fish get a variety of food in their lives as well, which stops them from becoming over-reliant on one food and then turning their little noses up at everything else. And also, don't feed them too much or too little, and don't do it in the wrong way. But that's going to be the topic for the next video in this mini-series, because at this point I have waffled at you for long enough about fish nutrition, and so I hope you've enjoyed this little video though, all about feeding the fishies. Happy fish keeping everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye!